I want to ask you something before we start this video. When you think about intercultural mindedness, whose job do you think it is? If your answer leans towards the languages department or perhaps humanities, I would like you to reconsider, because the IB wouldn't agree with you. And by the end of this video, I don't think you will agree either. I am Carmen Millán, founder and director of Mestralia Education, and if you have just started teaching in an IB school or perhaps you're thinking about it, this video is for you. By the end of it, you'll have a clear answer to the question I just asked. You'll also understand what the IB expects of you around intercultural mindedness, and you will have 3 habits that you can start trying in your lessons this week, whatever subject that you teach. So let's start with what the IB actually says. The mission statement calls for internationally minded people who help create a better and more peaceful world through cultural understanding and respect. Being internationally minded does not just apply to students, it includes all the adults in the building responsible for delivering that IB education. The IB standards and practices also position intercultural understanding as a professional responsibility. The IB learner profile applies to the whole school community. It includes attributes such as being open-minded, being principled, being caring. That is not something that the students need to develop. It applies to everyone. They are not just descriptors. They are actually a professional standard, and they apply to you. When you join an IB school, you are not just signing up to deliver a new curriculum. You're actually signing up for something deeper, more personal, your own intercultural journey. If you are just starting on this journey, or if you have never stopped to think about how this affects you, I would like to mention 3 aspects backed up by research that I think will be really useful. First of all, is that the development of intercultural competence is fundamentally based on attitudes. So it's not knowledge, it is not skills, it's attitudes, and specifically curiosity, openness, and the willingness to suspend your own judgment long enough to genuinely understand a different perspective. If that disposition isn't naturally present in you, it is going to be very difficult that you develop it reliably in your students. And this is where it can get a little bit uncomfortable in the best possible way. So a second element I would like to mention is that researchers found that teachers who haven't examined their own cultural positionality, their own assumptions, their own defaults, they risk creating one cultural frame in their classroom. And when that happens, students whose backgrounds are different from that frame, they learn to translate themselves for school. They become fluent in your culture, but they rarely see theirs reflected back. And a final point to mention is that developing intercultural competence isn't just a switch that you flip. It is a continuum from a position where your own culture is a default lens to a position where you can calmly and genuinely hold multiple perspectives at once. Teachers who haven't reflected on where they sit along this continuum, they tend to manage cultural difference in their classrooms rather than explore it. Now, back to the question I asked at the beginning. The most common misconception is that questions of culture, of intercultural understanding, belong to the languages classroom. And as you can see, this is not accurate. Every such subject area is a potential space where you can develop intercultural understanding and respect. Teach your students the cultural lens that you are using. Show them that there are other perspectives. If you teach literature, language and literature, every decision made in the curriculum about which authors, which texts are going to be read is a decision about the voices that students are going to hear, but it will be interesting to also interrogate the voices and the spaces that are absent. If you teach history, geography, economics, or psychology, these subjects, these disciplines carry a dominant cultural narrative. Whose history are you teaching? From whose perspective? Name the lens for your students. Teach them how to question it alongside you. If you teach science and maths, or maths, and which are usually associated with being neutral, teach them that this is also a cultural assumption. Who gets credited for scientific discovery in your curriculum? Whose mathematical traditions are being acknowledged? The history of science, the history of maths is rich with contributions from traditions that are perhaps not represented in your curriculum and that are routinely left out of the standard narrative. Mention them. And if you teach arts or physical and health education, teach your students that aesthetic values are also culturally constructed. Assumptions about competition, about physicality, and what counts as excellence vary enormously. So you are in a unique position to explore that openly with your students. So what does this look like in practice? I'm going to give you 3 suggestions that you can start applying straight away in your lessons. There's no additional workload, but they can really make a difference. So first of all, audit your materials. Before your next unit, ask yourself, how many perspectives are represented in my lessons, in my scheme of work? Are these perspectives, if present, are they authentic or are they tokenistic? Is diversity built into my lessons, into my curriculum, or is it just decorative? If you start asking this single question consistently, it will transform what you teach over time. Habit number 2, name the cultural frame. When you introduce a concept, make the cultural framing visible. Say something like, this is how this issue is traditionally discussed in Western academic context, but that's not the only way to approach it. That simple sentence normalizes critical cultural awareness for your students, and it signals that you are on the same learning journey as they are. Habit number 3 is try to keep a short reflective journal, just 2 or 3 sentences. Where did you feel comfortable or uncomfortable during a lesson? Or where did the student's perspective genuinely challenge you? Professional growth in intercultural competence requires reflection, and the same structured reflection you ask of your students. So back to the question, whose job is intercultural mindedness? It is yours, in your subject area, and starting with your own assumptions. The IB expects it, the research supports it, and your students need it. Your one action this week is, before your next unit, ask one question: whose perspective is centered here and whose is missing? The IB asks a lot from its teachers, and that's because it knows that the world your students are entering needs people who can really manage difference and embrace diversity with curiosity, with empathy, and with rigor. You are the model for that. So be patient with yourself and keep going. If this video has prompted a question or a reflection, there are links below to further resources and more videos coming soon. I'm Carmen Millán from Mestralia Education, and I'll see you in the next video.